right, guys, it's time to talk about the maps. There is a new ladder season right now in Brood War, in StarCraft Remastered. And that means new maps. We don't get too many seasons a year, so this is a very exciting time. And I want to just kind of go over them and talk about them a little bit so that when you're queuing up on the ladder, you know what you want to veto, you know what you want to play, you know how to approach these maps a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So going into ranked here. Map preference. So here is the new map pool. We have 4 maps staying. That's Eclipse, Circuit Breakers, Fighting Spirit, and Polypoid. And then we have 3 new maps. Benzene, Plasma, Ringing Bloom. Okay? Let's just go ahead and we're going to look at these maps and I'll kind of describe how they play a little bit. Let's jump over and we'll get some pictures up on Liquipedia. We'll go with Benzene first. All right. So Benzene. It's a 2-player map. Very important to mention. The spawns top right, bottom left. Here's some of the interesting things for you, and I guess it'll probably be a little bit more focused from the Terran point of view, as I'm a Terran player, but hopefully helpful for everybody. Okay, so here's some big things that are going on here, right? So I guess we can, I just minimized it. Here we go. All right, let's look at the top right base. Okay, so first off, obviously it is a 2-player map, so there can be a lot of proxy plays. Let me show you where the buildable terrains are that you have to look for proxies. Your whole main base is buildable. Back here, let me really zoom in so people can see this. Back here, you see my mouse cursor there? Back there is not buildable. That's very thin. They can build down in your natural, and then you have to go down here at the 3rd base. This is buildable terrain. And right up here is buildable terrain. So those are the possible proxy locations. There's also buildable terrain in the center of the map, like right behind my head right here. I realize that the cursor is hard to see. I'm sorry about that. But these 2 areas are buildable as well. So you could technically have proxies there. So those are the locations that you're looking for people who are going to cheese you. Now, here's some of the things. It has the kind of wide open main base, so it's very easy to get dropped here. And especially when you look at your flow of units, your units come out of your main through your natural towards this 3rd base area. So your units are pretty darn far away from your main, so you really have to be careful about drops on Benzene. And drops are especially powerful because you do have this high ground behind your natural. It's very easy to get units in here to attack. Now this right here, see that? I'm circling it. That is killable. So for instance, your opponent can run units over, go up this ramp, go down here, and then hit your minerals, right? Hit your nexus, your hatchery, whatever. They can put units up here, but you can send units around to go attack them. It's a very thin area, so it can be a little bit difficult to deal with. But also with this here, you can end up killing this to get through there as well. One big point that I want to mention to people, because this is going to happen to so many people on the ladder, if you expand to your 3rd base here or your 4th base down here, and you try to transfer workers from your main base, they will glitch out because of this. They will be trying to walk through this, and they will just go back and forth in this area. Okay? So when you're transferring, there's a couple ways you can do it. One, you can just kill this. Okay, if you have time, if you can kill that before you take a 3rd base, go ahead and kill it. If not, one of the ways that I transfer on this map is I transfer SCVs from this base to that base, and then you can transfer them, or you can transfer from this base to that base. This is a little bit less efficient, but it takes less actions from you. You can transfer from this base to that base, and then transfer from this base to that base. So basically, you're moving some SCVs to here, and then you're moving these SCVs to there, right? You lose more mining time that way. But if you're really busy microing somewhere, maybe that's the way you want to try something like that. So yeah, that's kind of how this map plays out. These are high grounds in the center. Very important to control these 2 areas. Lots of areas to hide tech. Like for instance, again, if you're top right and you're playing against a Terran or Protoss player, you might get tech hidden here. You might get tech hidden here. So those are some of the locations you're going to want to scout. Okay. Next up would be Eclipse. We had this in the last season. It's a great map. I love this map. Really well made. Again, it's a 2-player map. There are a lot of locations where proxies can be made, where people can hide buildings over on your side. Let's take a look, I guess, at the top right once again here, and I'll show those locations. Obviously, inside of your whole main base is buildable. The natural is a place where you can get some hidden buildings there as well. And then you have to go around here. This area is buildable. So this is something that's not on a scout path. Like if you send your SCV probe drone across the map, they will go down the ramp, go up this ramp, and go through the center, and they will not see her. So you actually have to duck your worker in and check this area for proxies. Other than that, sometimes people proxy over here. There's some buildable terrain over here. And sometimes the really far away one that's kind of sneaky is them putting at your third base. It's a lot further away, but occasionally people hide buildings there. As far as the map plays, some important aspects would be the top left is a double geyser. So that's something that you really have to watch out for. Like, for instance, if in a matchup where gas is really important, for instance, if you're playing Terran against Zerg and they get the space, you're in a lot of trouble. Don't let them take the space. These that are generally considered fourth bases are the most wide open on the map. These are the most attackable 2 bases. But they're also the easiest to take as a fourth because they're right next to your third base, right? The third bases are very easy to defend because of the single ramp. But there's a very wide open area and a long distance between a natural expansion, your first expansion, and your third base, right? So that can be a little bit hard to defend because it is so wide open. For instance, as a Terran player, you may want to consider making more than 2 factories against Protoss before taking your third base so that you can get some extra units. Also, this area here that doesn't have rocks on it is buildable. You can see that up here too. There's a big buildable area up here. You can do things like put buildings there. You can put depots, land barracks, put missile turrets, things like that to make a centered defense where you rally your units to so that you can defend your natural location and your third base. Now, as far as important areas of the map, right? Again, these fourth base locations are the most attackable. They're the widest open. They're not impossible to defend by any means. But there's a lot of ways to run around, right? Like you can go down here and come up the ramp to come from this side. That's the least likely. This is the most likely here, the wide ramps from one to the other. Also, you have this whole corridor here that a lot of people forget about, where armies can move through there more quickly than through the main path, which is these 2 high grounds. Of course, these 2 high grounds are really important to end up holding within the game. You know, like, for instance, if you can have units above your opponent's high ground, let's say that I'm playing from the top right position, my opponent's in the bottom left. Holding this area, this high ground, is super strong because they have to defend right here very, very well. They can't really attack up into you. And if you move your army incorrectly, they can flow down very quickly to either kill reinforcements, go after your natural, go after your third base, something like that. I guess the last point I'd want to point out about Eclipse is in the bottom right. There's 2 bases, one that's kind of on each side. These are very easily defendable, but kind of out of the way. This area strategically is not all that powerful, but it has the 2 bases, so it's something that you really have to keep an eye on. A lot of players do like to, like for instance, as a Terran player, if you're playing against Zerg or Protoss, or if you're a Protoss player playing against Zerg, these are bases that they're going to love to take because they're very easy to wall off, very easy to defend, very hard to break. So definitely important areas. Overall, I think that this is a really cool and really fun map. Oh, one more thing. This looks droppable. It is not. Okay? It looks like this is an area where you can unload some siege tanks or, you know, put some dragoons back there, whatever. It is not. You cannot unload anything there. I don't know why they made it look like that. It's a no-go. Okay, let's look at the next map. The next map, this one is the craziest map that is in the new map pool. Plasma. It's kind of an old map. I think a lot of you will probably veto this map. But let's just take a look and I'll show you, right? So it's a 3-player map. There's a spawn here, there's a spawn here, there's a spawn here. Okay? The mains are tiny. The mains. You can't really build very much up there, so oftentimes your production will be on the low ground. And the thing is, it's a semi-island map. Okay, there's rows of eggs. These Zerg eggs have 10 armor, so they're actually extremely hard to kill, especially early on, because all units early on don't do high damage. Something like a DT that swipes for 40 can kill a 10 armor egg easily because they're doing 30 damage a swipe. Whereas a Marine attacking this does 1 damage at a time. So it's gonna take all day to break through eggs with Zerglings, Marines, even Zealots. So that makes this a map that you can be very greedy on. You see a lot of things like just fast expansions, right? Because your opponent has a hard time attacking you here. But one thing to mention, there's minerals on both sides of the eggs. Every area with eggs, look, see the 2 minerals over there? Over here as well, 2 minerals. In the center, 2 minerals. Up here, 2 minerals, 2 minerals. Those are so that you can glide a worker through. You simply tell the worker to mine the minerals, and when it pops through, tell the worker to move. You don't actually want it to mine the minerals because then it'll turn around and go home. And if you mine out those small patches that don't have that much, then suddenly you can't glide through. This makes it so that there is some play, some scouting in the early game. And there's definitely some cheesing abilities. For instance, you can see a drone pop through to some side and make a hidden hatchery. You can see a pylon go through and then proxy a gateway or something like that, do a cannon rush. All these things are definitely very doable. But the eggs can be killed a little bit later in the game. Some of the cleaner ways to kill eggs would be things like siege tanks. In siege mode, will clear them pretty quickly. Size Storm is the quickest way to clear them. You can use all sorts of things like that. Lurkers can be a good way. Once you do clear all the eggs, it becomes a much more normal map rather than an island map type of situation. You can notice the center has 3... well, I wouldn't call them easily defendable. They have 1 small ramp, so they're easily defendable in that way, but there's 360 degrees to attack from the air, so drops and things like that, sieging them up can be pretty easy. But yeah, the map opens up into a more normal type of thing. The warning I want to give people about this map, because you're probably either going to love this map or hate this map. It's almost purely strategic. This map, unlike a lot of others, it doesn't matter so much how well you produce your workers, how many units you make, how good your macro is, how good your micro is. Those things actually aren't going to come into play here very much. You're going to win a lot of games and lose a lot of games purely off of strategy here. So it's going to feel a little bit random because whatever you decide to do, you can't be guaranteed it's going to work. There's nothing that's completely safe here, right? If you try to play a completely safe game where you don't die to any cheese and your opponent makes 2 bases right off the bat, you're dead there, right? Because macro is going to matter at some point. If you try to do the 2 bases right away and they do something like send a probe through and make a gateway, you're going to die to that. So it's very, very highly strategic. You're going to have a lot of volatility on this map, so take that into consideration whether you're going to veto the map or not. It's definitely one that can make you frustrated but also make you feel like a genius. Alright, so that's Plasma. Let's see what else we have here. We have Circuit Breakers returning, of course. I think people know this map really well, but we'll take a quick look at it anyways. Alright, Circuit Breakers. This is our big macro map. It's so very standard. This is one of the 2 maps that never goes away, along with Fighting Spirit. It's a 4-corner spawn map. I guess some of the interesting things about Fighting Spirit, and part of the reason people really like it, it's very easy to defend a lot of bases. So, for instance, you start here. Let's use top right again. Your natural, very easy to take and defend. It's a little bit wide open, but it's not that bad. You can definitely defend that. And then this area, the reason why it's so easy to take a 3rd base is this area. Because you have 2 bridges that lead over, and people can't really attack over bridges. It's just the funneling mechanic of that. You're going to destroy them if your units are here. Then also, there's this big high ground that leads down to your 3rd base. But it's not that hard to defend. It matters which matchup. I think in Protoss vs Zerg is where you might end up having a hard time defending this area, because if they get Hydra Lurker up there, it's very hard to break because of that high ground advantage. But like, for instance, if you're playing Terran versus Protoss, you can kind of siege tanks here and float a building and watch everything come, and you'll very easily defend your third base, which is, by the way, a mineral-only base, so something to take into consideration. Then you have this kind of interesting dynamic of 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So 12 o'clock, this is a gas expansion, but it's on low ground with 2 ramps coming down from either side. So this is extremely attackable, right? You don't have vision above it unless you have something up there. There's multiple entrances. There's a lot of room for dropping in there. It's not anywhere near as defendable. So sometimes you'll just see like mass cannons down here, pylon walls, you'll see depot walls. You know, from the Zerg side, this is definitely not taken as much as some of the other maps, because again, it's much easier to attack than any other base. It's the most attackable base is the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock down here. It's the same thing, just a mirror of it. Let's talk about 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So this one is a bit more easy to defend. There's only a single ramp coming down. It's the same type of idea, right? The split minerals, anyone might actually end up taking it. I guess that the way that you decide about what you're going to do with these bases it has to do with spawns. Like, for instance, if you start in the top right and your opponent starts in the top left, you guys are not going to take the 12 o'clock base. That's not going to happen. You're much more likely to end up taking this base, the 3 o'clock, right? You're going to probably expand down, and so is your opponent. Whereas if you start in the top right and your opponent starts in the bottom right, this base is not so likely to be taken, right? There's probably going to be more scuffles here. This is going to be easier to attack. So in a situation like that, your opponent's probably going to take 6, and you're probably going to take 12. As far as cheeses and buildable terrain here, where you need to scout, sometimes people do really crazy all-in opening strategies. Like if you start, again, top right, you can do a 2/3 proxy where you're guessing where your opponent is, where you're like, well, I'm over here, so 2/3 of the time he'll be on the left side of the map, right? So you actually can try proxying here. Also, 2/3 of the time he's going to be on the bottom of the map, so you can make it behind where my head is right now, right? Those are both buildable terrains that you might put it into. That one you're not going to see all that often because it is so risky. But the center here, see this area that's kind of outlined by the dark tiles? This center area is buildable. Nothing else in the middle of the map is buildable, just the very center. So you might want to open your games checking that location for things like barracks and for things like gateways, just to see, because this is relatively short distance to every base, right? It's that same distance. So that's more likely where you're going to have someone put stuff to attack you. These high ground areas are completely unbuildable, just to mention. Yeah, that's just about it for circuit breakers. I think people know that map pretty well anyways. All right, what's next? Good old Fighting Spirit. Fighting Spirit. This is the really old map that we have in the pool. Another one like circuit breakers that never goes away. 4-player spawn in the corners. Yeah, I mean, you've got kind of like a very easily defended natural base. Zoom in quite a bit. Once again, looking at the top right. So if you spawn here, right, you get this base. It's pretty easy to defend. And then the third is not too bad. Because it's like initially you'll be defending like this little choke right here. And then you'll move down and you'll defend the bridge, which it's a pretty wide bridge, but it's hard for people to attack over any sort of bridge. So you can kind of make this a funnel point where you're defending. And then you have a ramp that goes up to your third base and one ramp that goes down. So these bases are extremely popular to take. You're going to see a lot of Zerg players take them in each matchup because, you know, you think of it as one entrance because you can reinforce. If you're this top right area, you can reinforce very easily via this ramp, but your opponent can't attack via this ramp. They can only attack via this ramp. Right? So, very easily defended. There is There is a buildable center. In fact, there's a lot of buildable terrain here. You see these like light tannish brownish tiles. These are unbuildable, but the green is buildable and the dark brown is buildable. Not these rocks though, right? So like you can see turrets set up in these areas for pushes. You can see gateways, barracks, whatever in the center. There's like a barracks fits here. You can put barracks over here, anything like that. Those 2/3 proxies can work, of course, because you have bases at 6, 12, 3, and 9. The center is an expansion technically. There's only 2 situations where you actually see that taken. One is in endgame Terran versus Terran, where sometimes that'll be a base that you can actually take and it'll be fought over. And then in Terran versus Protoss, if you're playing against carriers and you have some control of the center of the map with Goliaths, that can be another situation where you see that. But generally speaking, this is not a base anyone's going to take. Yeah, so that's Fighting Spirit for you. Everyone knows that map. All right, next up is Polypoid. Polypoid was added last season. This is a great new 4-player map. I love this map. I think it is super, super well made. It's the 4 corners once again that you get, 4-player map. It looks a little bit like Fighting Spirit at the very first glance, but it's actually very, very interesting, I think, compared to Fighting Spirit. Let's zoom in and we'll use the top right again as our example. So let's say you spawn here. Obviously, you take this base as your natural expansion. It's pretty well defendable. Your third base is generally going to be this mineral base, and this is on high ground. You have a very big ramp here and a very big ramp here. This actually makes for some really interesting positional plays where you can actually help defend your natural by standing units up here, right? If you're on the high ground and your opponent is trying to attack into your natural base, you can come off the high ground and they like, for instance, they won't see you coming down, and then suddenly you're hitting them with units that they don't see. It's a very important area. Like if your opponent's holding this area, it's really hard to attack out. Like if there's a bunch of Dragoons up there and you have your army, you must push it very slowly as a Terran player. Obviously, if a Zerg gets control of this area and has Lurker Hydra or something on it, that's very tough for Protoss to break out. So definitely beware of this area. Make sure you're holding this area. It's a very valuable location. It's like basically the center of your defense is generally going to be up here around your third base, that mineral only base. Now at 12, 6, 3, and 9, we have gas expansions with 2 ramps. These are not as easily defendable as the Fighting Spirit bases that we looked at, because this area is not necessarily completely owned by you, right? You might be holding this area and want to expand here as your next base, but you don't just completely own this area. This is not a free rally up to defend. And then, of course, there's going to be one wide open ramp. So you want to think about maybe walling this off in some way, whether you're making a sim city with your evolution chambers and sunkens and another hatchery, maybe a pylon wall, maybe put some depots down, things like that. As far as buildable terrain, this entire high ground that you have at the third base, not all of it's buildable, about half of it. So where you put your command center Nexus hatchery is buildable, of course, and then you have a little area that you can put some buildings in there, like a barracks will fit, a couple depots, turret, whatever, but not the whole thing. So that is an area where you can put some buildings. This entire area is buildable outside of your natural bases. Nothing buildable over here. You can kind of see the rocks. A lot of buildable terrains are visible. You know, you kind of get used to it. All these kind of tan ones are not buildable there. And even some of these green ones are not buildable as well. Some of these green tiles. As far as the center goes, the very center is not buildable, so you won't see proxies right there, but right outside of it, you have areas that you can put buildings. If you want to do things like double proxy gate attacks on this map, go into single player and check out exactly where you want to put your gateways, because some of these areas are very, very tight and won't fit 2 gateways. So you'll try to go there and build 2, and you'll get 1 down, and you'll be like, oh, oops. So yeah, that's Polypoid for you. I think this is a really good map. It's really interesting the way units move around. There's a lot of cool choices and fun battles that happen on this map. I think it's like a vastly improved version of Fighting Spirit almost. It's not very turtly. A lot of action. Very cool map. right, so that's Polypoid. Next up, and last up, Ringing Bloom. All right. All right, Ringing Bloom. This is a brand new map that is in ASL, and speaking of which, a lot of these maps are maps that are in ASL. Benzene, Eclipse, Plasma, Polypoid, and Ringing Bloom are all in ASL Season 10. So somewhere that you can definitely watch some pros play on these maps. Okay, so Ringing Bloom. This one is definitely very weird and very different. This is actually kind of an older version of it. This is not the newest one to look at. Maybe this is. No. Okay, hold on. Maybe we can jump into the one that's in the game. Show you a picture of it. Not sure why Wikipedia did not update that yet. Yeah, we'll just pop up this one. Okay, well, this is actually the worst view of it that you can really get. Why? Okay, hold on one second here. Okay, I have a version of it that we can look at. One second. Okay. This is from the map webpage for ASL. Okay, so this is a much better version we can look at. So it's a 4-player map once again in the corners. This one is very, 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 very different from the other ones though. So let's take a look at why that is. So again, looking at the top right, you spawn here, you have a ramp, a very wide ramp that is going up into your main base. And let's look at the weird features of this. First off, there's 2 eggs on either side. So those are very hard to kill. They have that high armor that we talked about on Plasma already. And that just makes the ramp smaller, so it's easier to defend early on. So that's just a standard thing. You can kill those later on if you would like. Then you see these weird Zerg-looking buildings here. They're like overmines or something from the single player. And there's a very specific reason that these 2 buildings are here that we're going to talk about. And it has to do with where your first expansion is. So your first expansion is basically free on this map. It's in the back of your main base. So it can't be attacked early on, right? They have to go through your main base to get to your natural expansion. So you can't get Bunker Rush. You can't get Cannon Rush. You can't get Zealot Rush, whatever. The Zerglings aren't going to get there. It's a very safe, easy to take base. But the reason why these 2 buildings are here is for Zerg. So Zerg needs a central defense early on with sunken colonies, or they can't win games. It will become completely impossible for them to win. It would be completely stupid. So what happens with these 2 Zerg buildings that are there? They have creep underneath, and you can send a drone to them and build a building underneath. The building being the creep colony, which, by the way, quick little thing, you can actually put a Nidus there. So that's kind of a fun thing that we could end up seeing some as this game gets played, like just popping a Nidus up in another base instantly, something that we've never seen in StarCraft 1, really. Anyways, it's there so that you can build your sunken defense at the ramp. Obviously, once you put the creep colony down, it sends more creep out, so you can build more buildings there as Zerg as well. But that's what that's there for. Once you get a bunch of units, I suggest as a Terran or Protoss player, just kill them off, so that they're not in the way. You have a little bit more room there to walk around and everything. It's not catching your eye or anything. But yeah, that's very important for the defense. Now, because there is this back natural that's so easy to take, and you have this very defensible ramp, and you can wall this in very easily. This is a 2 depot 1 barracks wall, which means Terran and Protoss can both wall this so easily. You're going to see a lot of greed on this map. This is a map where Nexus first, Command Center first, obviously Hatchery first. That's any map, really. But you're going to see a lot of those plays. And because of that, there might become a little metagame on the ladder of doing proxy plays to try to kill it, right? Like put 2 barracks in the center, put two you know, gateways in the center, whatever. And as you can see, yeah, you can make some buildings in the center of the map. It's not an issue. You definitely can do that if that's the way you want to play it. Now, after the initial base that you take here, it's kind of a wide open area, but there is a good amount of buildable terrain here. And this is a mineral base. So this might be the 3rd base for some players. Specifically, probably Terran players will be taking this as a third. And so far, I've seen Zergs taking it as a third pretty often as well, and building most of their hatcheries here to help make a wall because it is so wide open. So it's a little bit hard to defend, kind of like the third base on Eclipse that we were talking about before. Once you look over here at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, you have gas expansions with a bridge and then a more wide open area to get to them. So this is something that you might want to think about taking. You have to be careful because it's easier for your opponent to flow in from a direction like this and harder for you to flow in with the bridge. That being said, maybe you prefer to take the base down here, right? Like if you've taken that mineral only as your third, maybe you have a more forward position and you want to take here so that you have the more easily defendable bridge. This base technically is further from you though, so it's a choice you have to make. Honestly, I think for the most part, we're going to see this as the fourth base. And then this is something that you don't even really think about. So yeah, that's Ringing Bloom. And that actually shows our entire map pool. Yeah, to start off on this, what I'm going to do personally for my vetoes, I mean, everyone's going to have their own vetoes. I don't want to play purely strategic, highly volatile games. I want to practice in a different way. So I'm going to go ahead and veto Plasma. And Benzene, I think, is a really good map, but it requires a different way to play a lot of time for my race, the Terran race. So I'll probably unveto it later, but I'm going to veto it just to start the season off. And of course, I always veto Fighting Spirit because I hate that map. But that's a personal thing. I'm one of the only ones that does that. Okay, so there you go. That is the new ladder season and the new maps. So good luck.